Hey, so in our last video, Jack and I had a look at a Chibson, a cheap Chinese Gibson, and pointed out some of the things you need to watch out for to make sure you don't accidentally end up buying a fake guitar. Now that guitar that we looked at was scarily accurate in some ways, and also had a few modifications to make it a little less obvious. We have since managed to acquire another one of these things for research purposes, and this one has a few more of the things to watch out for that we were talking about in the last video. So I thought I'd just show you some of those details on this guitar. Alright, so again we'll start at the headstock. This one, as Jack pointed out, the lettering on the Les Paul model, it's all one thickness, so it doesn't have the skinny to thick lines that a real Les Paul would have. Also, the Gibson logo here is pretty tragic actually. It looks good at first, but if you look closely, like the end there is kind of off skew. It's not quite straight up in line with the rest of the lettering. The O there's quite a big gap at the top of the O, so it almost looks like a U. So it's definitely not as slick as the last one we looked at. Here is that truss rod cover we talked about, the Les Paul standard. You don't see this on a real Gibson. Some Gibsons have standard written, but it's a different font, and you do see Les Paul custom on some, but I don't think you ever see Les Paul standard written in that way, and it's a bit kind of blurry. It's not as clean as it would be if Gibson sort of did it, you would hope. The fret edges, like Jack pointed out, there's no fret nibs on this, so the binding is under the frets. It doesn't go over the edge of the frets. The colour of the guitar is very bright. I don't think you'd see a Gibson so bright. They do this kind of colour, but it's quite orangey, this one. And it's very shiny and very glossy. Because Gibsons have like a nitro cellulose lacquer, it's not quite so mirror finish as you find on cheap guitars that have a really thick polyurethane lacquer. The plastic parts are quite, well, plasticky for want of a better word, but they're very creamy, and they just, you probably can't tell in the video, but they just look a little bit cheaper in real life. The pickups and the bridge and hardware are all chrome. I think on a Gibson they would be nickel, which is just a little, not quite so silvery, a little bit kind of just a slightly darker chrome. The bridge here, as Jack was talking about, the screw adjustment that cheap bridges have that Gibsons don't have. It's actually really handy. It makes it way easier to adjust the bridge. But it's not traditional, and in a Gibson you would just adjust the bridge with these little thumb screws, which are hard to turn. You have to really slacken off the strings. But this is sort of a more modern style, and while it is kind of useful, it's not something you'll find on a real Gibson. They just, as Jack said, have the little dot and then the thumb screw, not the flat head adjustment that this one has. The hardware also does seem quite, it's definitely a cheaper kind of metal than you'd find on a $3,000–4,000 guitar. These knobs here seem kind of the wrong colour. They're a bit pale. They're not as dark and rich looking as a Gibson would be. Let's have a look at the back. It does have the Made in USA stamp, but it's a little bit too clear. It's a little bit too clean cut. A Gibson one is a little bit more embossed and sort of usually lacquered over, and it doesn't look quite as clear and easy to read usually as that. This is definitely not made in USA. If we look at the tuning heads there, they are not put on very straight. So see this one in the middle, it's really close to the edge of the headstock, and that's not something you'd find on a Gibson. The other thing with the tuning heads here that I've noticed is that the ratios are a bit weird. So when you're tuning it, it doesn't always, it doesn't tune as quickly as you might think, as you might expect. So you have to keep turning quite a lot to get the string to tune, just because the ratios aren't quite the same as what they would be on an American guitar. The neck doesn't have the scarf joint, so it's one piece up here. But again, we've got the join here. It's really hard to see on this one, but there is a little bit of a join there. So a Gibson would be one piece all the way up there. The veneer on the back to make it look like a one piece. The interesting thing about this is that it's definitely a veneer. You can maybe not see it, but there is a veneer at the top on the back there. But the interesting about this is that it's a two-piece veneer. So they haven't even managed to do a one-piece veneer. So there's still a join down the middle. So even though we've got a veneer on the back of this to make it look less pieces than it is, the last one we looked at was a one-piece veneer, as this one is a two-piece veneer. Still got the join down here to show you that it's several pieces of wood. So the other thing I'm going to show you is the electronics. So let's just whip the back plate off. Alright, so the first thing and the most obvious thing is that the pots here, the tone and volume pots, are little mini pots like you would find on a cheaper guitar. A proper one would have CTS style pots, or actual CTS pots, so they're much bigger. You can see that this is a much bigger control. Also the wiring here, Gibson wiring is usually braided, so the outside of it is the metal ground runs around the outside of the wire rather than these coloured plasticky wires. So that's another thing to watch out for. The caps, usually these are orange and bigger in a Gibson. So those are the main things to watch out for. Just having a feel of it overall, it's a perfectly playable guitar. It's actually reasonably well set up out of the box and fairly easy to play. It sounds okay plugged in, it sounds fine, but it definitely does not feel or look like a $3,000 or $4,000 guitar. In person it's pretty obvious. You might be tricked online into buying one of these, but in person if you looked at it you wouldn't be, I don't think, unless you really were new to the world of guitars. But it's it definitely feels, it doesn't even feel like a sort of a high-end Epiphone. It more feels like sort of a mid or a low range kind of Epiphone guitar. It's not bad for the money, but it's a long way off a Gibson Les Paul. So those are just things to watch out for. Again, hope you enjoyed these videos and get something out of them, and hope it just helps you avoid making a mistake in the future by accidentally buying a fake Gibson when you meant to buy a real one. Again, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube page, like and leave a comment about what you'd like to see in future videos, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.